patient who kept calling. I have worked night shifts in healthcare for a long time, long enough that I stopped being surprised by most things years ago. The overnight hours in a hospital have a particular quality that is difficult to describe to someone who has not experienced them. It is not simply quiet, it is a specific kind of quiet that has weight to it, a presence of its own. The building does not sleep the way the city outside it sleeps. It just becomes something different, something slower and darker and harder to read. I am telling you this because I want you to understand that I am not someone who startles easily. What happened on the shift I'm about to describe startled me. It was a Tuesday night in February. The ward I was working was a general medical floor, 12 rooms, 7 occupied that night, routine medications to administer, standard observations to complete. The kind of shift that experienced overnight staff recognized immediately as either genuinely quiet or deceptively quiet. I was hoping for genuinely quiet. I started my rounds at midnight. Rooms 1 through 6 were unremarkable. Sleeping patients, normal observations, the low hum of monitors doing exactly what monitors were supposed to do. I reached room 7. The call light above the door was on. I went in. The patient in room 7 was an elderly man named Mr. Bellamy. He had been admitted 4 days earlier with a chest infection that was responding well to treatment. He was pleasant and uncomplaining and had never once used his call button in 4 days, despite being given every opportunity to do so. I asked him what he needed. He said he had not pressed the call button. I told him the light above his door was on. He said he had been asleep until I came in. I reset the call light and noted it as a possible technical fault and continued my rounds. 20 minutes later, the call light for room 7 activated again. I went back. Mr. Bellamy was awake this time. He said he had heard it too. He said the button was on the rail of his bed and he had not touched it. I looked at the call button. It was on the rail of his bed, exactly where it should be. I picked it up and examined it. Nothing wrong with it that I could see. I told him I would have maintenance look at it in the morning and reset the light again. I was at the nurse's station writing up my notes when the light came on a third time. I sat and looked at it for a moment. Then I went back to room 7. Mr. Bellamy was sitting up. He looked at me when I came in with an expression I had not seen on his face before in 4 days of caring for him. He looked uncomfortable. I asked what was wrong. He said he did not want to sound foolish. I told him he absolutely would not sound foolish. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he thought someone else was pressing the button. I looked around the room. Single occupancy, 1 bed, 1 patient, nobody else present. I asked him what he meant. He said there was a woman in the room. He said she had been there since around midnight. He said she was standing in the corner near the window. He said she was an older woman, small, grey hair. She was wearing a hospital gown. He said she had been pressing the call button herself. He said he thought she was trying to get someone to come in. I looked at the corner near the window, empty. I kept my expression completely neutral, the way you learn to do in this job, and asked him if the woman was still there now. He looked at the corner. He said no. He said she had left when I came in. He said she had been there the previous 2 nights as well, but he had not wanted to mention it. I sat with Mr. Bellamy for a while and made sure he was comfortable and told him I would check in regularly through the night. When I left his room, I stood in the corridor for a moment. Then I did something I did not entirely plan to do. I went to the ward records and looked up the history of room 7. I was not looking for anything specific. I just needed to do something with the feeling I had standing in that corridor. The room history showed previous occupants going back several years. I scrolled through them, then I stopped. 8 months earlier, room 7 had been occupied by a woman, elderly, small build, admitted with a cardiac condition. She had passed away in that room on a Tuesday night in February, almost exactly a year before the shift I was working. I sat at the ward computer for a long time. I thought about a call light activating 3 times in a room where the patient swore he had not touched the button. I thought about an elderly woman in a hospital gown standing in the corner near the window. I thought about Mr. Bellamy saying she was trying to get someone to come in. I finished my shift without incident. Mr. Bellamy was discharged 4 days later. On his way out, he stopped at the nurses' station. He thanked the staff. Then he said one more thing before he left. He said he hoped someone had figured out what the woman in room 7 needed. He said she had seemed like she just wanted someone to notice her. He said that, in his experience, that was all most people ever really wanted. Then he picked up his bag and walked to the elevator. And I stood at the nurse's station and thought about a call light activating at midnight on a Tuesday night in February. And a woman who had died in that room almost exactly a year before, still pressing the button, still waiting for someone to come in. The name on the board. Every ward has a patient board. It is one of those things that becomes so familiar you stop seeing it. A whiteboard at the nurse's station listing every occupied room, every patient name, every relevant flag that the oncoming shift needed to know about immediately. Updated at every handover, checked constantly throughout the shift. You looked at it so many times a night that it became wallpaper, which is why it took me longer than it should have to notice the name. I was 3 hours into a night shift on a surgical recovery ward. 6 patients, all post-operative, all stable. The kind of shift where the work was steady and routine, and the biggest challenge was staying sharp enough to catch the small changes that mattered in post-surgical patients. I was at the nurse's station updating documentation when I glanced at the patient board. Something was wrong with it. I looked more carefully. There were 7 names on the board. I had 6 patients. I counted the names again. 7. I looked at the room numbers beside each name. 6 of them corresponded to the 6 occupied rooms on the ward. The 7th was beside a room number I did not recognize. Room 19. Our ward did not have a room 19. We had rooms 1 through 14, and then the treatment room and the storage room and the staff bathroom. The numbering did not go to 19. I stood at the nurse's station and looked at the board. The name beside room 19 was written in the same marker as all the other names. The same handwriting, the same format. A first name and a last name and a flag beside it that said simply, "Waiting." I looked at the name for a long time. Then I looked at the ward around me. The corridor was empty. The occupied rooms were quiet. The monitors were doing what monitors did at 3 in the morning. I went to find the other nurse on shift with me. Her name was Bev. She had worked this ward for 14 years and was the kind of person whose reaction to things told you everything you needed to know about how seriously to take them. I showed her the board. She looked at it. She looked at the name beside room 19. Her expression did not change exactly, but something in it shifted in a way I noticed. I asked her if she had written that name on the board. She said no. I asked if she knew who had. She said no. I asked if she knew what room 19 was. She was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up the eraser from the tray below the board. She erased the name beside room 19. She erased the room number. She put the eraser back in the tray. She looked at me. She said, "Finish your documentation and I will do the 2 o'clock checks." I said I wanted to know what room 19 was. She looked at me for a long moment, then she said there used to be a room 19. She said the ward had been reconfigured 12 years ago when the surgical unit expanded. Two smaller rooms had been combined into one larger room. The room that had been room 19 no longer existed as a separate space. It was now part of the storage room at the end of the corridor. I looked at the storage room door. I looked at the board, at the clean space where the name had been. I asked Bev who the name belonged to. She said she did not know. I did not entirely believe her, but I did not push it. I finished my documentation. Bev did the 2 o'clock checks. The rest of the shift passed without incident. At handover in the morning, I mentioned the name on the board to the day staff. They looked at each other. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then the day charge nurse said it happened occasionally. She said nobody had ever figured out who wrote it. She said it was always the same name, always beside room 19, always with the same flag. Waiting, I asked what the name was. She told me. I looked it up when I got home. A patient who had been on that ward 12 years ago, who had been in room 19 when the ward was reconfigured, who had passed away in that room before the reconfiguration was completed, who had never technically been formally discharged, whose name still appeared on the board occasionally in the handwriting of nobody currently working on the ward, still flagged, still waiting for a room that no longer existed, in a ward that had moved on without them. Four in the morning. There is a time of night in a hospital that the staff talk about. Not officially, not in any training or policy document, just between themselves in the way that people who work in a particular environment share the knowledge that the environment produces. The time is 4 in the morning, not 3, not 5, 4. The staff who have worked enough overnight shifts will tell you the same thing regardless of which hospital they work in or how long they have been doing the job. 4 in the morning is different. The patients who are going to deteriorate often do it around 4. The ones who are at the end often go around 4. The ward feels different at 4 in a way that is difficult to put language to. Heavier somehow, more present, as though the building itself is more awake at 4 than at any other point in the overnight hours. I know how that sounds. I am telling you anyway because it is true and because every nurse I have ever worked a night shift with has said some version of the same thing. I had been working nights for 2 years when the 4 in the morning I am about to describe happened. It was an ordinary shift up to that point. Medical ward, 8 patients, stable across the board. The kind of night where you stayed vigilant precisely because nothing was happening and nothing happening could change quickly. I was doing my observations at 3:45. I had gotten to room 6 when I heard something from the far end of the corridor. A sound. I stopped in the doorway of room 6 and listened. It came again. A voice, faint, coming from the direction of room 12 at the far end of the ward. Room 12 was empty that night, had been empty for 3 days. I stood in the corridor and listened. The voice came again. I could not make out words, only the tone of it. It sounded like someone talking to another person, the rhythm of it, the particular cadence of a one-sided conversation where you could hear only one participant. I walked toward room 12. The door was open, the way empty rooms were left at night. The room was dark. I reached in and turned on the light. Empty, bed stripped, equipment pushed to the walls, the particular bareness of a room between occupants. I stood in the doorway and looked at the empty room. I turned the light off. I went back to my observations. At 4:05, the voice came again, clearer this time, still from the direction of room 12. I was not the only one who heard it this time. The healthcare assistant on shift with me came out of the room she was working in and looked down the corridor. She looked at me. I looked at her. We both looked at room 12. We walked down together. The room was empty. The room was silent. We stood in the doorway together for a moment. Then she said something quietly that I have thought about many times since. She said that in 2 years of working this ward, she had learned that room 12 was a room where people often went right before the end. Not medically, not because of anything about the room itself, just that it had happened repeatedly over the 2 years she had been there. Patients moved into room 12 would sometimes take a turn in the night, and when they did, it was often around 4 in the morning. I looked at the empty room. I asked her who had been in room 12 most recently. She told me, a man, elderly, discharged 3 days ago. I asked if he had been all right when he left. She said he had seemed fine at discharge. I went back to my station and looked him up. I found a next of kin contact number in the file. I did not call it, and it was 4 in the morning, but something made me note it down. I called the number at 9 the following morning before I went to sleep. A woman answered. I introduced myself and said I was calling from the ward her father had recently been discharged from. I said I was just doing a routine follow-up call. She was quiet for a moment, then she said her father had passed away. I asked when. She said 3 days ago. The day he had been discharged, he had made it home. He had sat in his chair by the window, and he had passed away quietly that same evening. I thanked her and offered my condolences and ended the call. I sat in my car in the hospital car park and thought about a voice coming from an empty room at 4 in the morning. The room where he had spent his last nights in the hospital, 3 days after he had gone home, as though some part of him had come back to the last place he had felt looked after, one more time, at 4 in the morning, when the ward was quiet enough to hear him.